7 common mistakes when mixing bass or low end. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, welcome back to MixFest TV. Hope you're having a great day. Before we start, please check the info box down below for my mixing courses on Pro Mix Academy, free plugins, special discounts and offers. And if you really want to learn how to mix and master professionally, click the join button down here, become a MixFest TV member. Access the already big and always growing library of full mixing courses start to finish, mastering courses on so many different genres and a lot more. And if the videos are helping you, please consider using the new feature, the super thanks, down here and support the channel. Let's get to the video. Once again, short, no bullshit, straight to the point, quick list. Number 1, this goes for all kinds of bass, 808, synth bass, and electric bass. Not having mid-range and also high-end on your bass. There are many different styles, and sometimes, especially on trap and hip-hop, we use pure sine waves for our 808s. But generally speaking, even in those cases, we want a bass line that is intelligible and one that the listener can pick up and understand the articulation. For this to happen is essential for your bass to have mid-range content and high-end content, especially for rock and metal. So you don't want a bass that sounds like this. And don't be afraid to boost those mid frequencies if needed. In fact, especially for rock and metal and pop, one of the ranges that I often boost on bass is around 1K 800. The key is don't do these EQ moves in solo. Always do them in the context of the mix, because the more mid-range you have on your bass, the less powerful it sounds at the bottom, okay? So it's a fine line. But if you don't have enough mid-range, you will find yourself boosting the level of that bass and never hear it in the mix. Second mistake is the always present, not using automation, especially on a real instrument, an electric bass, but also on synths. Don't try to have the compressor do all the work for you. Compressor on bass is essential more often than not, but you need to ride that fader. Andy Wallace, my favorite mixing engineer, he has some of the most powerful basses in his mixes and he rides every single note. So number 3, wrong use of compression, especially again on a played instrument. Some people tend to try to chop off the peaks with too fast of an attack, and that kind of chokes the bass and the articulation. And sometimes they use too slow of a release, so the compressor doesn't let go and you kill the sustain of a bass. Okay, let's try to simulate a wrong setting. Okay, you hear how the bass is choked. As soon as it grabs it just pushes too much. Even if we reduce the ratio, that effect of hitting a wall is still there. If a bass plays has peaked because maybe it's a rock bass and it's rattling, or the player was hitting too much, use a limiter. It's more transparent, okay? And then use a slower attack. And watch your release. You want the release to be fast enough to release and increase the sustain of the bass, but not too fast. Otherwise, pretty much any compressor will start to introduce distortion with a too fast of an attack. So it's really a fine line. Now the bass is thicker, but it's still natural sounding. Next one, not using saturation on bass or using it wrong. Personally, I really like multi-band saturation on bass because you can be really subtle with a deep low end, which the cleaner you leave that part, the better usually. But a little bit of subtle saturation helps a lot. And you can increase density and intelligibility by using a richer saturation in the mid-range. When it comes to saturation, especially on low-end elements, is where hardware really wins the battle. But let me give you an example of some of my favorite settings using Ozone Exciter. For example, for me, for a very deep low end, I am very conservative and I usually set my crossover where the last usable fundamental it is. And then I set a very, very subtle saturation there that just makes it warmer. You don't want that part to start crunching. If the first crossover is too low and you want to enrich the mid-range, I usually add another band and I bypass this one. And I use this red one in this case for the mid-range. And then we can change this to analog and be very subtle in this range. Okay, this is just an example, but not only multiband saturation, a tape emulator is also really good on bass because it kind of tames naturally the dynamic while adding harmonic content. Number 5, mixing bass in solo. Remember the biggest EQ mistakes video talking about the kick drum? Same for the bass, same for everything, but the bass in particular. Don't EQ and don't mix your bass in solo because more than any other elements in a mix, the bass gets masked. In the mid-range, especially in the low end, if there are other low-end elements. So always mix your bass in context. Number 6, we talked about this in many videos before, especially the ones on parallel EQ. Watch for phase problems if you do any parallel processing on your bass, especially EQ, which I always advise. Don't parallel EQ, especially low-end elements like bass, okay? Because you're gonna create a phase shift that is either unpredictable or is gonna cause phase cancellation. So even if you do parallel compression or parallel saturation, don't EQ the parallel channel, EQ the source. If it ends up having too much low end or too much low mids, don't EQ the parallel, EQ the dry signal, which in turn will remove the excess frequency in the parallel as well. Last one is not about the bass itself, but it's the bass in your mix. Sometimes it's not your bass that is wrong, it's your top end. We go back to masking. Sometimes if a mix is too bright, you have the impression that it's thin and it doesn't have enough low end, so you try to boost it, but maybe you already have a ton of low end and you run out of headroom and you don't know what else to do. Step back and assess. Is my top end too much? And that's why I perceive the mix as sounding thin. I can tell you this story for context. There was a brand of speakers that were making studio monitors. They were bringing this new model to various studios and everybody perceived their monitors as thin sounding and with no low end. Turns out that that demo pair had something wrong with the tweeter, which was too high in level, and everybody perceived the speakers as thin sounding and with no bass. Once they fixed the tweeter, the monitors were balanced. So just for reference, I think this is it for this video. If you guys liked it, don't forget to leave a like and please consider using the super thanks, the new features down here. Click the join button, become a member if you want to really learn how to mix and master professionally. Check all the links in the info box down below before you go. Stay safe, subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.
Hands on my neck, hands grip my throat, lift me up.